Okay, well, good morning to everyone. Welcome to SCORE Bucks County's webinar on how to prepare a proper business plan. My name is Linda Zangrelli. I'm the current chapter chair for SCORE Bucks County. And we're happy today to have one of our own who has been with SCORE 20 years. He's a veteran and executive, and I'm going to have our seminar chair describe him in a little bit, but I'm going to give a commercial before we get started. The commercial's about SCORE Bucks County and about SCORE in general. Just a few housekeeping items before we get started. This is being recorded. You will all get a copy of the recording, and you will get a copy of the slides. So you don't have to take copious notes. Everything will come to you after. Please hold all questions until the end. And when you do have a question, put it in the Q&A and not in the chat. We will address all questions at the end of the session. So who is SCORE? Many of you, I'm sure, are familiar. Many may need a little education there. So SCORE is a national nonprofit organization. There are some 350 chapters, 13,000 members all over the United States. Our mission is very simple. We're dedicated to helping small business start, grow, and succeed. We are also a resource partner of the Small Business Administration. So Bucks County SCORE is just one of those chapters. We encompass the entire county as well as Eastern Montgomery County. So we have some 50 members who all come from various business walks of life. Some have started their own business. Some have been in corporate life, but they all have the skill sets that a mentor needs to help you get started in business. Our mission, as I said, is to help the small business owner get where they need to be and succeed. We do that through free mentoring services. So all of our people are volunteers. They give their time freely, and they can help you if you just have an idea and want to vet it, or if you have a business and maybe you need a little help pushing it through and getting it more successful. We have people who can help you. So if you're looking for that kind of help, please go to our website. It's buckscounty.score.org, and we'll put that in the chat for you. And just click on the tab that says, I'd like a mentor. And once you do that, the wheels are set in motion and a mentor will be assigned to you, and you'll go from there. Mentoring services, as I said, are free, and they can go as long as you need us. So please know that we're here to help should you need us. We also accomplish our mission through seminars like this. And thanks to COVID, everything is virtual and everything is free. So that's been a one benefit of the COVID shutdown. We've had to turn to our virtual world. And since we don't have expenses in producing these, we then can give them to you for free. So there's one thing good about COVID, I guess. The last thing I'd like to say is if you're a person out there who thinks that you could help us in our mentoring and you'd like to join and be a volunteer, same website, buckscounty.score.org, and just say, I'd like to be a mentor as well, and we'll take it from there. So that is my pitch. If you have any questions, hop in the chat or in the Q&A and just ask. If you have questions about the presentation, put in the Q&A. If you'd like to chat with me, you have that option as well. So I would like to turn this now to the gentleman who makes all this possible. He is the head of our seminar committee. He has worked diligently to put on probably one or two of these a week, and we are really lucky to have him. His name is Ed Torello. Ed?
Thank you very much, Linda, and thank you all for joining us. I know you're anxious to get started. I'm just going to say one or two quick things. This is one of 35 webinars that we've put together for 2021 and 2022. We have 40 of them put together already for you. They'll all be on Tuesdays, or they'll all be at 11:30. Just to highlight the next three coming up in November, we have cash flow, the basics. We've got how to obtain bank financing, actually by Mr. Kroger, who was a senior bank official and did all of the lending to small businesses. And then we have website planning 101. So I think you'll find that very interesting. All of that is available on our website, so you can sign up. Now we have a really, really good presentation, how to prepare a proper business plan. And John Shaheen is one of our senior SCORE mentors. And he is formerly the president and CEO of National Computer Analytics, a publicly traded software company that's based in Princeton, New Jersey. And among other things, they develop software for large financial institutions in the US and in Europe. And the company operated a financial account processing data center in Princeton for small and medium-sized banks in the Eastern US. So John has an awful lot of experience. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to John so that we can begin. John?
Thank you, Ed. Today, we're going to discuss several things. First of all, why a business plan? Why should we have a business plan? And then I'll discuss what the purposes of a plan are, and what the objectives and discussion points that we'll do will be later on. And finally, we'll have a Q&A period. Okay, next slide. A well thought out business plan can help avoid pitfalls by planning for the future. You can create an effective strategy for growth, determine your future financial needs, and most importantly, attract investors and lenders. There's an unfortunate statistic, but it's important to say that 60% of businesses will fail within the first 3 years of their existence due to lack of planning. Next. Some of the biggest pitfalls that you will encounter putting together a business plan. Number one is not ensuring that you have sufficient startup capital to launch the business. Also, not being specific as to what the purpose of the business is and what your goals are. Also, neglecting to do preliminary market research in order to determine whether or not there's a need for your product or service. And finally, not identifying existing competitors in your trading and market area. Next. Biggest pitfalls will include not seeking advice and counsel from someone experienced in starting and running a business. For example, SCORE. As you've just mentioned, as was mentioned by Linda Zingrelli, we're a national organization. We're here to help you, and it's free service, and you should take advantage of that service. Very important is not establishing a relationship with the bank or other funding source prior to your need for capital. You don't want to wait until the last minute when you need capital and walk into a bank and say, oh, I want to go into business and I need some capital. You want to make a relationship, establish a relationship if you haven't done already with a bank, and let them know that you're thinking of starting a business or you're just starting a business, and that you'll be back to see if he can help you in any way, or she can help you, perhaps, and you may need some help in financing it. Also, not meticulously reviewing your plan with someone else is important in order to determine if you have any weakness in your plan. As you will see as you get into it, you're going to see gaps perhaps in your plan, and you want to make sure that you review it again, and also with some other people as well. Next. Now, the purpose of a business plan. First of all, a business plan acts as a roadmap to guide you through the steps necessary to conduct a business. If you don't know where you're going, any road will take you there. So anybody starting up in business really needs, it's very, very important to have a map to really serve as a guide for them. Now, this map can change. A roadmap or a plan is a living document. So as situations change, well, you can change your roadmap. You can alter that, but it's very necessary to have that. The second, and very much maybe the most important document to have for you is to acquire funding. Because this is quite necessary. If you walk into a bank, as we were suggesting, and you say, fine, I've been a good customer of yours, I'd like to start that business. The banker will say, oh, that's great, I'm here to help you. Bring me your business plan. So it's very important that you have such a plan. And many times the banker will send you back to SCORE to whip you into shape or a plan into shape, and then resume your interview with that. And I guess the very important thing, as I indicated earlier, a business plan allows you to discover weaknesses in your idea. You know, you put a lot of thought into this, but okay, you know what you want to do, but if you don't have a plan, it's difficult for you to see where there might be any weakness. And that's important because you're going to be put to the test when as and if you go for some funding. So again, that's an important facet of the business plan. Next. Our mission statement. Now, what you need to do is really set forth what your goals are. And where do you want to be? Okay, how will you get there? You got to think of this. Most people haven't given that a lot of thought, but this is extremely important. And that should be really something you should focus on. Write down what you want, where you think you're going, why you want to get there, why do you think you might be a success in doing so. Next. Okay. Another objective of the plan is marketing. Before you do anything, you want to conduct a preliminary market research, as I mentioned earlier, to determine whether or not your product or service is really viable, really it's good. Again, by now you've thought about it, and you should really have a reason for moving ahead on it. So the first thing you want to do is to identify your target market and all of the available potential customers that exist in that market. You need, at this point, describe your product or service in some detail so that they'll know what it is you're trying to sell. And after all, you want to specify exactly how you intend to sell this. Are you going to do this direct from home or from storefronts if it's a product, or big box stores, or social media, for example, Facebook, or perhaps use sales agents, which some others do, or internet direct, so a website. Also, maybe you want to go to an online incubator like Amazon. As you may or may not know, some new businesses team up with Amazon. Amazon will provide an incubator for you to get your business off the ground. They'll charge a fee, of course, until you get rolling, and then you can break away. There are some potential hazards here because they might think that your products are good, and they might decide to copy some of them, but more often than not, that's not the case. You also want to develop promotional materials, such as advertising, brochures, direct mail, etc. So all of this is most important, but it's extremely important to identify who your market is, if that market exists. Okay, now, next, what you want to do is, when you've done that, determine the pricing of your product or your service. Now, before you do that, you need to know what your costs are. Okay, to produce that product, etc., and what the market conditions are, and how the competitors are pricing it. So in that connection, you're going to want to have an analysis, a projection of cash flow, etc. We'll discuss that in a little bit greater detail later. Next. Now, as I mentioned, you need to know who your competitors are. You might be surrounded by competitors who are marketing the same or close to the same product. You want to be sure that that's not the case. Again, all along the way, these steps are very important. And your pricing policy, of course, is important. So perhaps you can find out how they price their goods and services. And the big thing is how do you plan to differentiate yourself from them? That is most important. Next. Financial. Now, as I indicated earlier, you need to analyze your startup costs and your ongoing cash requirements and all the funding services available to you. First thing you need to do is to calculate your startup costs prior to your launch. Now, these would include, for example, office or building rental, preparation of the site, location expenses, tools, equipment, anything else that you would need to set up your business. That's a startup requirement. And perhaps a dedicated phone line and office supply. You may also, you need to develop the barriers to entry. For example, if you want to build an automobile manufacturing company to produce EV automobiles and compete with Tesla, fine. Your barrier to entry is going to be extremely significant. On the other hand, if you're a lady that's emigrated from Eastern Europe and you want to set up a cleaning business, your barrier to entry might be minimal or maybe even next to none. So again, that's extremely important. So the first thing you've got to do is to sit down and project your income and expenses for the next 24 months. Now, you might say, well, that's going to be very difficult. How can I do that? I really haven't thought about it that much. Well, the thing is, if you haven't, certainly the banker hasn't, I haven't, only you know what to expect. You've been thinking about this a long, long time. So I'm sure you didn't go into business just to not make some money. So you put down your projection for 24 months. You make it your best guess. Now, the next projection you want, and this one is probably the most important, and this is the monthly cash flow projection for the next 12 months at least. You know, there's a difference between profit and cash flow. Let me give you an example. If in your business you need to acquire some heavy equipment for a building, an automobile, let's say, or even a computer, what your account will have you do is to capitalize that. It becomes an asset. Even though you paid for it, it's an asset which then you'll depreciate over the life of that asset. And the accounting profession has said that's the proper way to do it because you're matching use of that product, of that asset, against your growth. However, it doesn't tell the story about how much cash you spend. You've already spent the cash. I've seen businesses go out of business showing a profit. And how could that be? Well, as I said, if they've spent an inordinate amount of cash on product or equipment, and that's still reflected on the books as an asset, your cash has been depleted. And if you run into some difficulty, some hard time, you don't have a reserve, or let's say, again, the sales that you made, you're not collecting them, your receivables are bad or they're old, they're aged, and they're big, you can literally go out of business while the company is still showing the product. And certainly that's not something you want to do. So again, you may want to discuss these types of things with your accountant, but above all, I always say that that's most important. I think as far as the income and expenses are concerned, the banker's going to want to see that. And when you make these projections for the bank, you want to be careful not to overdo it. For example, you don't want to show that in the first year you're going to earn $1 million. It's unreasonable. At the same time, you don't want to say you're not getting anywhere. There's one word that's important, and that is trend. You know, bankers don't mind a little red ink in the first couple of months of a business startup. I mean, that's expected. So long as it doesn't stay that way and that the trend is up, that you're showing some success in doing that. Now, we're going to talk a little bit about funding sources. I mentioned the bank, which I believe is really the best way to go, okay, for startups. And when you present your business plan to him, make sure that you've done all of the things that we've mentioned. You've thought about it and why you want to be in a business, why you think you will succeed, and then go over the numbers with him. And keep in mind one important thing. The banker is not only looking at your numbers, he's looking at you. He's going to make a determination as to whether or not you have what it takes to run this business. So that's why it behooves you to have a very comprehensive, well thought out plan, because that then communicates to him that you've done your homework, you know what you're talking about, and your chances of success are pretty good. Now, he may also, probably would, require some collateral if you have it to pledge and secure the loan that he will give you. Now, many people feel intimidated by bankers, banks, which used to be the case, not so much now, but the banker may seem a little bit tough to you, but believe me, he wants to help you. The bank is in business to make money. And the way they make their money is through loans primarily. So I always say, make it easy for the banker to lend you the money by helping him with a very well thought out business plan. Because keep in mind, depending on how much money you're requiring, he has to answer to a lot of people. If the loan is a large loan, he may have to, it's beyond his limit, he'll have to take it to the board of directors who will sit and review any loan suggestions that come before them, and they will be the final determinator. Also keep in mind that banks are very heavily regulated, either by the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, the Federal Reserve System, control of the currency, and various state banking authorities who periodically will come in and examine the entire bank's loan portfolio. And so bankers are really pressured to keep that portfolio clean, up to date, and believable. And they do not want to be criticized. So that's extremely important. And once you know these things, you're going to be better able to understand where the banker is coming from and why it's necessary, again, to have a very well thought out business plan. To the extent that you've covered all the steps required, you're going to lessen the number of questions he's going to ask you. You're establishing your credibility. You're establishing your character, and also the fact that you've done your homework. You don't want to come in there, as I said earlier, oh, well, yeah, I'd like to have a loan. And by the way, when he asks, well, how much would you like to have? You don't want to say, all I can get. You're going to be out the door. But you need to say, this is what I need. This is what I need for. I need so much for this equipment, so much for that, so much for my operating expenses. be very specific, as specific as you can. He'll appreciate that very much, and it'll go a long way towards making a positive decision. That's very, very important. And again, presumably you've established a relationship with a bank, as I said earlier, so that your idea of going to business is not going to be a new one for him. It's very important to do that. Now, he will most definitely, since you're a new startup, ask you to personally guarantee the loan, which is fine, happens all the time with everyone. So that means you're going to have to personally guarantee it with your assets, could be your home, your other assets, automobiles, whatever assets you have. But that's, the bank is perhaps the best way to go if you can. However, I have to tell you that for startups, there's a pretty high rate of possibility that you won't be bankable. But you should try that first and arm yourself with a good business plan, as I said. But if that doesn't work, then perhaps you might want to engage a venture capitalist, which is a popular source of funding for new enterprises. Now, they're in business certainly to make money. They can be very direct with you. They will probably sit somebody on your board if you have a board, or become an advisor to you, which is very good. Their thing is to not only sit with you and track you along, but they will provide either debt or equity capital. Of course, equity means giving up a part of your business to them. Now, there's an advantage and disadvantage in both of those situations. If it's a loan, of course, and you're able to pay it back, well, you still have 100% of your company. All right. But if it's equity, you're giving up part of your company. But the advantage there is you don't have to pay it back. So again, these are matters of judgment and negotiation. And when you interview with a venture capital, you may want to take somebody along with you who's experienced with these matters, perhaps your accountant. But don't go into them by yourself, because one interesting thing that happens, especially of late, they will say, we'll lend you the money at a very significant interest rate, by the way, but we want a convertible option on that note, which is to say they want to be able to convert into equity at some point in time. And there may be a date on that. It might be within the next 2 or 3 years. Now, they don't have to exercise that. What they're doing is hedging their bet, and they're following you. If they think that you're doing very good, they will exercise that option and become a partner with you. But if they feel you're not doing good, then they'll retain their creditor position, and you'll need to pay them back over time. So again, it's a mixed bag, but they're an important source of funding, and many very successful companies today use venture capitalists to really get them started. Also, another form of we call it venture capitalists are SBICs, small business investment companies. And these are very much like venture capitalists in that they do the same thing. They will provide debt financing or equity funding, but they may be funded themselves by the SBA through a guaranteed loan program. But they do combine quality and debt capital with startups only to those that they deem will be profitable. But that's another source you can try. Excuse me. Finally, there are angel investors. You might say, what's an angel investor? Typically, these are wealthy investors who will offer financial assistance to startup companies and that they believe have a future. And their idea is to hopefully cash in on the growth of your company. And perhaps if you ever get to the point where you have an IPO, I want to piggyback onto that. Typically, these are retired individuals who have a fair amount of capital, and they're a good source if you can locate them. There is an angel network that you can find with some research. Okay, in fact, I probably have one in my bag. Investors, if you ever need excuse me, my voice seems to be cracking here. Now, another thing the banker is going to want is insurance. Make sure that you have liability insurance, because don't forget his funds are at risk. But more importantly, he may want to have insurance, a key man insurance on you, because to the extent you're the key person, the only person, if something happens to you, you go out and get hit by a car, the business is dependent on you, my loan is at risk, the company's at risk. So typically the banker should insist on, not all of them do, not all of them don't think of that many times. There is another type of insurance you may want to consider, a little more expensive, and you may not want to start off with this, and that's business interruption insurance, which will give you the funds to keep paying your debts and moving along if something happens to your business or your building, if it's a building, etc., or wherever, or your business is interrupted in some particular manner. So that's something I don't hear many bankers talk about, not, but they should have that. Certainly they should insist on key man insurance with the bank as loss payee. I know I wouldn't lend a real bunch of money to somebody who is an individual proprietor where my money would be at risk. So that gets to be very important. And again, these individuals are people, but they're like you. They want to deal with you. That's why they're in business. They're anxious to lend you the money. They're anxious to buy a piece of your company. But the thing to remember is it's incumbent upon you to make it easy for them to do that. And the way you do that is seeing that you have developed your business plan completely and thoroughly. And before you do take the final plan anywhere, sit down with people again and have them review it again and again. It's not too later. It's important to do that. Let's put it that way, because we all are very self-centered. We have egos, and we think our plan is the best. We think we know what we're doing. We may know about our particular product, but we may not know the business of doing business. So it's important to understand that very much. Also, that brings me to your form of organization. On day one, you are de facto an individual proprietor. You and your business are identical. The costs and profits for your business are yours as well, directly. So just keep that in mind. And you're liable for anything that the business owes. Another type of organization is you may want to be a C corporation, but I don't recommend at all at this stage. But you might want to consider becoming an LLC. An LLC will offer you protection against any product failure, any other failures that happen in your business, liability, automobile liability and the like. And also, you have limited liability then for business debts, product litigation, and the like. Now, I should also tell you, it's not 100%. Some judges, in cases that have been brought, pierce that veil of limited liability if they believe that the only reason that you organized that way was to avoid someone coming at you for business that is not to above board. So believe me, they've seen this 100 times, so they know what they're doing. Just keep that in mind. Or you may want to be an S corporation. Now, that's a little bit more expensive. And again, this is something maybe down the road a little bit. And this is a form of ownership where profits and losses are passed through the corporation to you. Again, you will need to discuss that with your accountant to make absolutely certain that you're able to understand what this is all about, and that he knows and he can advise you to what the best form of the organization is. I mean, typically, most new entrepreneurs they're just individual proprietorships for a while, and perhaps the next step, or maybe at the outset, is to become an LLC. And one thing about approaching any of the above sources of capital, be it bank, venture capitalists, etc., they do this day in and day out, and they can spot problems very, very quickly. So you don't want to try to snow them. You want to be extremely above board about it all. You've seen a lot of this. And keep in mind that you are in constant competition with every available dollar of resource. So the bank, when I say bank, let's stipulate that that means everyone that you're talking to is a funder. You're really competing against other deals. And if you don't have a good business plan, and if you have something that is a little shady or not right or haven't thought out, you don't want to say, I don't know. You want to be prepared for all the questions you might get. Because if you don't, that goes into the trash can, because he's got another one coming down the pike and another one. Now, fortunately or unfortunately, most startups, because they don't come to a score, probably will not have as thorough as a plan as you can have and should have. It's worth its weight in gold. Think about it. You spent a lot of time, maybe months, maybe years, thinking of going into business. Oh, I'd like to go into this particular business. I think it would be very profitable. I think it would be very good. I have the fire in my belly. You're anxious to do that. But then when you go to do it, you don't succeed because you haven't really crystallized your thoughts. So it behooves you then to spend some time to really work on and develop a business plan. Now, I've had clients who said, oh, I don't know where to start. I don't know what to do. You've given me so much, etc. Well, I say, that's right. But I say, all I want you to do is get your thoughts down on paper. Do what I call a memory dump. I don't care how it's sequenced. I don't care about spelling, grammar, anything else. Just get your thoughts down. Once you start that, you'd be surprised at the deluge of thoughts that come out. By the way, that brings up another thing. You don't want the plan to be overly lengthy. Need not be. It doesn't want to be too short, but you need not be overly lengthy. Anyway, just get your thoughts down on paper. You know what you want to do. We'll say it, state it. Forget about how it looks, because we'll go through several iterations of that. I'm presuming you're coming to score. The objective here is to come up with a preliminary business plan. And you might find, or I might find, that you have a great sense of business, okay? You're fire in your belly and everything, but the product you have let's say, is a buggy whip. So when you analyze your market and who the takers will be, there won't be any takers for buggy whips, no matter how good you think you are, because we're not using horse and buggies. So that's why you want to test the market, and that's why you want to think these things through. So once you have that down and fashion that into a preliminary plan, by reworking, we come up to a very good plan that should be almost airtight. You've anticipated all the questions and any questions that the banker or any funding source can ask you. Now, believe me, when I say you've answered or thought of them all, you won't. There'll be one or two that they're going to be asked that we haven't covered, etc. But that's okay, just so there's not a whole deluge of them, which would indicate that you haven't done your homework. You've got to be convincing. You've got to, when I say sell the banker so he can sell you, that's what you need to keep in mind. They will ask questions, but the main thing is to be credible, be reasonable, and use good judgment, and really have people work with you, read your program over and again and again. Get next. So anyway, that's about it. We've covered a lot of territory. Now, if you have any questions, I'd be glad to entertain them.
Okay, thank you, John. You know, I thought before we start taking the questions, you started several businesses. When you started, how did you approach the bank? You put together a business plan. How about your first time, if you can think back?
Okay, hold on.
And tell us about your experience a little bit, because you obviously did it correctly.
Okay. Well, I can't open this up, but this is the first business plan that I wrote. Now, what I did was, I can't show it to you, but it maps out everything that I've said. Well, I had a somewhat of a knowledge of this stuff. I have a degree in economics, a master's in corporate finance, so I knew what a business plan should contain. But what I did was put together what I thought was an airtight plan, answered all the questions, etc. And if you didn't believe that I knew everything about the business, all you had to do is ask me. However, when I hit the streets to raise money, I think it took me maybe 6 or 7 months to attract enough capital with all kinds of financial resource, putting up my home, putting up any assets I had to secure these funds. But when I went into the business, as I was saying, I was able to develop a plan that I thought was great. Then I went out, hit the sidewalks to market the plan. And this particular plan was to establish a bank service data processing system, right? At that point, I knew all there was to know about it. I had worked on the E13B type font committee, which you probably don't know is how magnetic ink evolved, etc. And guess what? Every potential client that I visited, thought, great idea, great plan. My hopes went up, but we don't want to go. Why? You're brand new. You haven't been around. I'm going to take my records, okay, let you have all these. You might be out of business even though you have these funds. I don't want to be first, all right? So this happened over and over again. Now that's something that you don't learn in B school. And it's something that no one could tell you. How would you know that? Okay, so it depends on the product or service you're selling. That's certainly a very important area. And it was only with the grace of God after, I'm going to say almost a year, that prior to money running out, that I was able to attract one individual. He said, look, I'm going to give you guys a chance. I had 3 other partners. But what I'm going to do, and this involved, as I mentioned, running all of their accounts off-site at a data center in Princeton, away from the bank. So this individual said, all right, here's what we'll do. I'm going to continue to run my operation in parallel with yours, in parallel, to determine if you come up with the same results that I do after processing all of our accounts, et cetera. Okay, with the understanding it's going to be at no charge. And now, you know, I wasn't in a position to bargain. So he says, and I'm going to do this for 90 days. All right. Now, meanwhile, I'm incurring all this expense, 90 days, computer time, employees time. Okay. Fortunately, I raised enough money to do that. I had my own money, all at risk. So I thought, oh my God. So you're rolling the dice on the company. As I was walking out the door, true story, I said, wait a minute. I said, I have one proviso. What's that? I said, if at the end of 90 days, you're satisfied with what we've done, you'll pay me retroactively for the 3 months. Well, he laughed, but he did agree with it because he knew and he understood that I incurred all that expense. So again, this illustrates the notion that you should have other people sit with you and review these plans. I didn't know that at the time. I thought I knew everything there was to know about what I wanted to do, but there are aspects out there, nothing to do with your idea, that you just don't think about. So that's why it's important to have somebody who's involved in that. Another thing, we started a transportation company because this was before we went online. Now, that was costly. I hired a guy, had a little transportation company, and his thing was to pick up all of the work from a number of banks. I had, toward the end there, 45 to 50 banks in the tri-state area of New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania. And what I found is that they would go out and pick up the work, right? But there were big gaps in the computer time. So I did what is called a PERT analysis, program evaluation review technique, and found out that the critical path was running the computer. Okay, so I had to adjust the delivery and pickup schedules accordingly so that there would be no gaps in the processing time, which is to say, you go out to the bank that has the largest volume, bring that in, get that computer going, even if you have to retrace your steps. Okay, that's not the critical path. So there are things like that that only come through experience.
Okay, so we have an interesting question. I think this is true in some cases. Are banks still requiring life insurance, naming them as beneficiary for some loans?
They, you know what? I don't think that they should, but a lot of them don't. When I talk to banks, they either don't think of it, or they should. Maybe today they do, but I know if I were a banker, and as you know, I sat on the board of a bank for 10 years. So I know something a little bit about this. But if I were a banker and you're the guy, you could have a heart attack tomorrow. You could die, and if the business is dependent on you, I want to see that. I don't know if they ask for it or not. They should. Let's put it that way. If I were advising.
Okay, well, that makes a lot of sense, actually. So after you had your business going a while, okay, did you obviously, I assume, how often did you revise the business plan? As you got more successful, you obviously felt maybe you didn't have to do it, but then again, you might have felt that it was more critical than ever to
Well,
keep.
I always kept it as a document and always updated it. Okay, because as time goes on, things change. Okay, and the first bank, for example, when we went to completely off premises to completely online, all right? I had to revamp the entire plan, obviously. So it's, as I might have, maybe I didn't mention this, it's a living document. You keep it going, you keep it going. And then there's one final reason that you may want it. You know, we heard the seminar that was given earlier about an exit strategy. Well, you're going to want an updated plan in case you have, or if you're going to do an exit strategy, that strategy could mean merging with someone else, could mean going for an IPO, it could mean leaving the business. It could mean a lot of things, but you need to have that document that tells about the business. It's updated, what the history is, where it's been, et cetera. Now,
Would seem to me like as the business keeps growing and you keep redoing the document, you probably want to do it at least once every 6 months, just to keep it very current.
at least once every 6 months, things change. After our business got off the ground, let's say if the second or third year, we had the funds, we were going fine, we required some more money. So I went, I guess you have heard of Gerard Bank, and we negotiated the debenture, 15-year debenture with them. They're not a customer of mine, but they believed in what we're doing. So 15 years, with I had the option to pay it off, of course. So in about the 10th year, we were cycling up for an IPO, and you know a lot about this, Ed. But we were approached by a couple of underwriters, so forth and so on. And I said, well, let's get the company as profitable as we can, and we'll do an IPO. In the meantime, we formed a subsidiary, a joint venture subsidiary with a British firm, okay, which is located in London. And we had a plant here in the States at Fort Washington. And that added to our breadth and our width of our company and our revenues. And we were doing pretty well. And at that time, I could relax a little bit. Well, I don't mean really relax, because let me just take a little aside here. What I didn't say, entrepreneurs, you go into business, you're going to have a requirement to be strong. Now, you say, what? You mean physically strong? I say, well, no, maybe so if at the beginning you're lifting product and so forth, but I mean mentally, psychologically, emotionally strong, because things will go awry, okay? There are unseen pitfalls down there, and you've got to have the flexibility of mind and the mental flexibility to be able to deal with those. Every business will have this. If they say they don't, they're not telling the truth. So anyway, we were able to, work our way through the problems, didn't have a lot of problems. Then I was able to, I hate to say the word take it easy, because mentally you never take it easy. But the company was doing well. And so we had a public offering, which was great. We had, I think, 16 or so underwriters take a piece of it, of course, or supported, I should say. And that was great until one day out of the blue, I got approached by a very large international company by the name of EDS. You know who they are?
God, yeah.
Yeah.
He owned my brokerage firm.
What's that?
Ross Perot.
Ross Perot. So Mr. Perot says, I've been watching your company. And of course, we were international. We've got places all over here and in Europe, et cetera. And we have a very huge banking activity, but not so much in the East Coast, very minimal, not too much. But they had maybe 1,500 banks, but not a great number of them on the East Coast. So there was a great fit there. So after some negotiation back and forth between attorneys, et cetera, we did a deal that was very satisfactory. Okay, we're a public company at the time, and we were able to sell shares on the deal. Anyway, then I ended up being director of large financial institutions in his bank service division. And I worked there for him for 3 years until retirement. But that was a fun situation, huge company. And so that was an exit strategy. That was although we didn't intend to do that, but what I was getting at, that business plan was the document that all I was able to, here, read this. So it was really a necessary document that you should have for any and all purposes, immediate and future. And it keeps you thinking, keeps you alive. And you're going to find competitors will spring up. Would you believe that some large banks decided to go into the same business that we were in? So
Thank God you sold.
what's that?
Thank God you sold.
Well, yeah. Well, what happened was, and this is public information, one of our biggest competitors was Bank of America through a subsidiary, which they were allowed to organize, called the Decimus Corporation. Okay. Yeah, but banks, as a bank, could not engage in these activities. They formed a subsidiary, which they were allowed to do. But then what they did is undercut, underprice us, and why not? Because what they were interested in getting was a correspondent relationships with the banks in lieu of any other fee income. So that was a hard road to toe. But we mounted a counterattack by putting some fear to them by saying, well, how do you know that my bank customers, that this is a bank? They're going to look at your customers and maybe take some of your good customers away. You know, bankers are very fidgety. So that sort of worked. And also through some Freedom of Information Act, my very good attorney found out that the Bank of America did not go through all the necessary approvals to organize such a subsidiary. They didn't get the proper authority from the Fed, which they should have. So that put a damper on it, and they finally went away. And that's, I warned banks, don't go, they're going to get out of business. We're here to stay. So that was sort of the end of it. But there's some of the experiences I've had.
Oh, yeah. Well, it's interesting. You do have to fight back when competition attacks.
Yeah.
And yeah. Now, here's an interesting question. Are a one-page business plan sufficient when you're seeking capital?
One page. You know,
I think it's a little skimpy myself, but especially for if it's any kind of a business that has a lot of different assets, liabilities, and then if it's manufacturing, you need, the process. Seems like one is not enough.
no. I think a so-called one-page business plan, to me, should be a summary, a synopsis in one page.
Yeah, like the cover page.
Cover page to be followed by the detail. That one page should be a grabber. You get interest enough, in one page, but that is not the plan. That's
Right.
you don't want to have that's fooling somebody. You need to get into some detail.
When you were on the bank board and you looked at loans, I'm sure they passed over all the loans through the board at some point. What were you looking for as a red flag?
What I was looking for, well, first of all, let me say that the loans that came up to board level were those loans that were greater than the lending officer's limit. In other words, this is every loan, not 25 or even 50,000, but it was, in my case, times it changed maybe, it was $100,000. Now, what I looked for initially, before even drilling down, was to look at the plan itself again to determine whether or not this plan is well thought out, and also what the viability of this plan was and how it related to other plans that I've seen. And also, if he has in his projection, the proviso, how I'm going to be paid back. And part of that cash flow projection involves how you're going to pay the bank back. And of course, I looked at the product of the service. And I guess just as important, the character of the individual, the character of the individual. And also someone who might think, well, I better show that I can really do this. I'm going to say, as I mentioned earlier, make $1 million first. It has to pass the test of believability. I would rather see somebody who's very judicious and even start out with some red ink. All right. So long as maybe the third or fourth month you reach that break-even point where you're going to be profitable. And there's where that word trend is important to me anyway. So that's what I look for. Trend, direction.
Good. Did you ever have the potential borrower come and give a presentation to the board, or that wasn't necessary?
Well, yes, one or two occasions where actually well, I was on the board. I mean, it was brought to us where the loan officer would say, I'd like to have you come before our board, and say, all right, if it was pretty huge, pretty big loan, and maybe it bumped up against the bank's lending limit. The banks have limits also to how much they can lend. So the answer to that is yes, but not usually.
Okay, I was just curious, because when you do have big loans, sometimes you actually want to see who you're loaning the money to.
That's for sure.
Yeah, face to face.
Nine times out of 10, if the lending officer, take a fellow like one of our co-mentors, DeCroger, he's a lending officer. Well, if he came to the board and said, look, this is a loan I think we should consider, well, he's a very substantial lending officer. If it wasn't beyond his limit, typically the board would say, okay.
Mm-hmm. Right. I guess the only reason you would really delve into it if it's a business that's new, like new computer type things or stuff like that, where it requires a lot of, I guess, investigation and really looking at the market to see if it's really a viable idea.
Yeah. Well, the thing that being the case, what we do is a fair amount, or more than a fair amount of due diligence. It's just what you're saying. We may even go out on the road. Well, we would investigate. Maybe I wouldn't go personally, but some of others might. But I have been out there, go to the plant, interview personnel at the plant. Okay, and if it's a highly technical situation, bring along a tech expert. Okay, and if it's computer technology or let's say electric vehicle technology, or let's say the creation of new batteries for cars technology, for EVs. If it's something like that, then you bring a team out and do a fair amount of due diligence, particularly if the loan is pretty significant, to say the least.
Okay, I was just curious. Here's a question. Did you own the building near the intersection of Harrison and Nassau Streets in Princeton?
No. No, but it's funny you should mention that. We were down on Route 1, but we did own the building, our building. But no, I didn't own that one. We didn't own that one.
Oh, okay. I guess it's just. So when people are putting together a business plan and they're looking to sort of, as you said, I guess make different sections. So one of them would be, I guess, the item itself. Number two would be, I guess, the heavy due diligence to figure out exactly if there's a market for the product. And besides social media and everything else, where do you think they'd be going?
Well, first of all, if the due diligence uncovered the fact that if it's the product, let's get to the product. As I mentioned earlier, if you're going to manufacture buggy whips, bad news, there won't be any takers for that. So we're going to use our judgment See, and if they're taken, in fact, may do a separate investigation in the marketplace to determine whether or not this is a viable product or service. So, and that's extremely important.
Yeah, right. No, I was looking at that. Once you figure that out, then you should step in with what is it going to cost? I guess you have to put all of your costs down, starting with, I guess, revenue and then, revenue on one line and then putting everything at cost of goods sold, profit margin. How are you looking at the profit margin at the bottom?
Well, if the profit margin is good, okay, very important. Okay, as I said, there's the revenue line, the cost of goods sold, okay, then there's the gross profit, but then you have all the admin expenses, administrative expenses. Then you'll come back to EBITDA, earnings before income taxes and amortization. Okay, now that's extremely important, and that is what the whole industry goes by. But keep in mind, for startups, as important as that is, the cash flow report is the thing that's going to keep them alive for the 12 months or 24 months. So again, the profit and loss statement, extremely important, but it's an accounting concept per se, because you can have no cash and be out of business and show a profit. But here again, another thing is that you might have problems with receivables. You make the sale and the sale is made. All right. You turn that into an account receivable. Now that's an asset. That's something of value on it, that account receivable, but it's only good if it can be collected. So you could have many, many dead receivables there that you don't collect. Why did you collect them? Maybe there's a problem in your product or service. People aren't paying. Here again, until you go through them and age them and write some of them off, which depletes your income line, your cash is already depleted because you haven't collected anything. So a balance sheet can be full of things like that. And that's where the bank's due diligence really comes in. So we make a thorough investigation of those aspects. We don't like it now.
It's interesting. On the 9th of November, we're having a cash flow, the basics by Al Casida, to just go over this very item because it's so important and people don't realize it until it's too late.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be a good one. I think in his case, he's going to say what you should do when this happens, where you should get cash and who to pay and not to pay. And that brings up another example. This notion of banks, of the companies going out of business in 3 years. Again, bad things can happen. We had a time, we had about the 4th year, a real lull in activity for some reason. And we were going to be in a little bit of trouble. So I went to 1 or 2 of our biggest suppliers and asked them to hold on, okay? Let's work out a plan instead of, paying them 90 days or rather 60, 90 days. Can we stretch out a 120? You can do things like that. And so till we get over this bad patch. See, what I didn't tell you is we had a whole cadre of systems programmers as well, because as I mentioned, when you mentioned about some of the work we did overseas, that was mainly selling software, okay, to very large banks. And it was an audit package, okay, which embedded itself in the operational system of banks, that their demand deposit accounting system, their savings accounting system. And if anybody made a change in the program, this would trigger the response with this software, this algorithm that we put in there. And it was based on a counter, without getting into too much, that if it hit these certain parameters, we throw up a red light that somebody's fooling around with the system there, because there had been situations long ago where some ambitious systems guys and programmers would siphon off a few dollars or maybe even cents from 10,000 accounts and take that money, put it into a dummy account, transfer it to another bank. And that was the way a lot of embezzlements that took place, a lot of which you may never heard of because it's embarrassing to the bank. You know, they probably minor ones. So this software solved that problem. Okay. And so I just mentioned Europe, but we also sold it in Australia and Buenos Aires in Argentina as well. But they bought the system up front, then they paid an ongoing fee, a maintenance fee. Someone said, well, suppose they don't pay this maintenance fee. What are you going to do? Get on a plane and go? It's going to be expensive. No, we had part of that system. We had a counter, as I started saying there, of, I'm going to say, 120 days. Okay? This maintenance would be charged monthly. They would pay, it was minimal, every month. So if they didn't pay the first month, all right. They didn't pay the second month, okay. When it got to 90 months or 120 days, this counter would match that, and okay, the system would self-destruct. And they'd be on the phone to us. Something happened. Oh, so you see, it's all sorts of things that you can do. So each day would tick off.
Actually, they had that scandal, I remember years ago, where some guy was taking, rounding things up to the next penny or something, and he was siphoning that money off. He'd made millions till they caught him.
Yes.
Which they always do. Here's an interesting question. Should you write the executive summary last? Usually I see it as first, but what do you think?
Okay, well, certainly on your plan, it is first. It should be first. But the conventional wisdom, they say, is to write it last, because you will have gone through everything in your plan. You will have seen what you're going to do, how you're going to do it. Then you simply condense it down. I mean, others can write it first.
Right.
But
I think it's right at the end. Yeah.
Yeah,
Now
but
the way it's
yeah,
presented.
yeah. Let's present it at the opening.
All right. Well, we're right here at our appointed time, and it appears as though we've gone through our questions. So I'm going to say thank you so much for taking time to help us here with this webinar. And everybody should know you'll be getting a copy of the transcript and the slides within the next hour or two. So thank you again. I'm just going to turn it back to Linda, our president. Go ahead, Linda.
Hi there. Thank you so much, John, for all that information. And thank you, Ed, for putting it together. Thanks to all the participants for their time and attention. And as Ed has mentioned, we do this just about every week. So we hope we'll see you again next week.
Right. And Charles, our head of technology, has put out a number of our programs coming forward. So you need only check our website and you can see everything that's going on. Thank you again.
All right. Thank you again. Take care.